Welcome to AMA New York's Future of the CMO session, Marketing in a Cookieless World. This morning, we will dive into data ethics and consumer expectations, surprising outcomes for stewards of data. I am Karen McFarlane, immediate past president of AMA New York. I'm also co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee for AMA National's Professional Chapters Council and CMO of a boutique marketing and creative agency, Letter Shop. I want to thank everyone for joining today. But before we begin, I just want to take a few seconds to acknowledge the many families who lost loved ones in the senseless shootings that took place over the past week, and those who didn't make the news. We know gun violence is, for lack of a better word, a problem in our country, the result of which cannot be undone. And this is not anecdotal. The data shows us how much of a problem and how deep a chasm we have to cross for everyone to feel safe, especially our children. So thank you for indulging me for that brief moment. I want to thank Lori Johnson, who serves as our executive programs chair for AMA New York. Her work to bring premier programming that tackles the hard things that affect marketing leaders is core to the value we want to bring to our community. And her leadership continues to support our mission to inspire, support, and celebrate brilliance in marketing. So let's dive into our topic for today. Customer and shopper data collection in the evolving landscape of privacy involves moral decisions and has legal implications. This raises ethical questions that must be addressed as new data approaches are being adopted. Data ethics reaches beyond the confines of compliance with privacy policies and implementation of server APIs. It demands that we look in the mirror and be willing to ask if we are doing the right thing with the information that we have that relates to our customers and our shoppers. And when we do get it right, how does that change the way our brand resonates with the market we serve? To answer these questions and provide insights into what it means to be a data steward, I'd like to welcome part of the marketing leadership from Acoustic, who will be leading this discussion today. Acoustic is a multi-channel communications and analytics platform that helps digital journey professionals. And we have 4 great panelists from Acoustic who are experts in this subject. So everyone is in for a masterclass when it comes to the ethical use of data in marketing. I'll start with Kelly Owen Grover. Kelly is a cross-functional go-to-market growth strategist, currently leading growth efforts across the 3 global business units at Acoustic. With almost 20 years of experience, Kelly has held sales, business development, partnership, new venture, and marketing roles at multiple international companies. She specializes in translating aspirational company goals into actionable go-to-market strategy, extending far beyond the customer-facing team and connecting financial growth with elevating customer value. Next, we have Erin Mejia. Erin is Vice President of Product Management at Acoustic, a 15-year veteran in the space. She has held various roles in marketing. She has a passion for marketing and customer experience, which is at the heart of what is customer data. Now a product management leader for Acoustic Marketing Cloud, she builds best-in-class customer experience and campaign management tools for marketers. Avery Nash is Vice President of Product Insights at Acoustic, where she leads product management over the reporting and analytics components of Acoustic Marketing Cloud. An omni-channel MarTech expert with over 20 years of experience in marketing and advertising, Avery has been on the front lines of transformational initiatives for some of the top brands in retail, travel, entertainment, automotive, financial services, and insurance industries, among others. With a passion for data-driven marketing, Avery has deep experience leveraging a range of technologies to drive business growth. Prior to joining Acoustic, Avery led major projects, applications, initiatives at Axiom, Merkle, Teradata, HCL, Unica, and IBM. And finally, we have John Story. John is General Counsel and Chief Data Ethics Officer at Acoustic, where he leads the global legal and data stewardship functions for the company. A dual qualified attorney in California and the UK with extensive experience in complex multinational commercial and technology transactions, John helps guide companies' data practices and legal policies. Prior to joining Acoustic, John served as Director of Commercial Operations and Associate General Counsel at Pax Labs. and Associate General Counsel International at GoPro, among other legal advisory roles. So as you see, this panel will not disappoint, but rather engage and enlighten. Please feel free to add your questions to the chat at any time during discussion. We will have time for Q&A at the end. Thank you, Kelly, Erin, Avery, and John for being here today. And with that, let's get started and set the table. So Erin, how will the end of the cookie change marketing? Can you kick us off with that?
Yeah, so, it's no secret that visibility and access to customer data previously used for personalization to drive that conversion will generally no longer exist. So therefore, a first party data strategy and a zero party data strategy are more important than ever. So capturing consent, demographic data, behavioral data in own channels, such as your website, are key, right? And in conjunction with this change, customer experience is the new marketing, driving upwards of 60% increases in ROI. And so is your competitive advantage moving forward. So as such, like the next decade of marketing will be won by those companies that deliver those hyper-personalized experiences and fluid conversation across channels. And so to that end, capturing that first party data and creating a strong customer data strategy driven at the heart of it by data ethics, also enabled for that multi-channel world, is going to be paramount.
So Kelly, what won't change with the end of the cookie?
Yeah, Erin set me up perfectly because she was saying things in her answer that really are my answer as well. So things like data, things like mapping the customer journey, that was still true 30, 40, 50 years ago. We thought about it so differently. Right now, we're looking at it through the digital lens. But foundationally, mapping out your customer journey, understanding all of those touch points, having goals for each of the touch points, and leveraging data to support that goal attainment, having sometimes tough conversations between marketing, IT, data ethics, to really create a customer journey that's ultimately about delivering value to the customer. None of that changes, right? Like that overarching kind of strategic roadmap that we should all be coming back to and anchoring ourselves in. That doesn't change. The how we get there, right? And the type of data that we use, again, to piggyback off of what Erin said, that's the part that's going to continue to evolve. But I would say the framework of how we think of these things, we would actually be doing ourselves a really good service by not changing that, because I think it'll help to strip away some of those complexities that I think could almost be a distraction, right? And to get us back into what are we actually here to do? And it's to provide value.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredibly true. If you remain focused on the customer, doing the right thing really becomes very easy. So I'm going to turn to John. So John, how does this tie to or impact data ethics overall?
Well, so at its core, data ethics is not just about ensuring that you use data in a legal manner. That's the low bar. But in doing so in a way that's ethical and fair. And what is ethical and fair is not static. That will change as technology evolves and asks new questions of us. It will change as consumer perception evolves. And so the conversation shifts. But the overarching principle we feel at Acoustic, and I think this would be true of data ethics across the board, the overarching principle is that of trust. We are trusted with the data of customers, as we Acoustic or we any brand are trusted with the data of our customers. And so we need to treat that data in a way that engenders trust, and that delivers value to the customer as well. That's a competitive differentiator. So I don't think that we should see I don't think that we should see use of data in an ethical way as being counterproductive to the goals of the business. If we engender that trust, if we are delivering value to customers and applying that in the correct way across the customer's journey, and the way that we can engender that within a company is by creating a data ethics framework. And that's really something that, like anything at a company, you can't pay lip service to it. It needs board and executive buy-in. But a data ethics framework is really a set of guiding principles of how you and your company collects, stores, and uses and deletes data. And that framework will differ for each individual company based on their industry. But it's really about setting a set of guidelines which will allow you to navigate through the ethical environment in which you operate, to treat data in a trustworthy way, to ensure that you are a responsible steward of your customers' data, or in the B2B case, your customers' data, and implement those goals across your company by training and empowering your teams with those principles, and making sure that you are embedded within the life cycle of the product, making sure that you are embedded within the go-to-market process, to ensure that that ethical basis underpins what you're doing, because ultimately that serves your business goal, because it delivers value to the end customer, the value of trust.
You know, that's I just want to pull on that thread just a little bit in terms of that data framework. So who's involved, right? I assume it has to be across the organization, but if you're starting to think about this data framework as, you know, as an organization, before you get into the department specifically, like, what does that process look like in pulling that team together? Who has to be involved in that process?
Yeah, so I think it naturally needs to be cross-functional. You need a lead, and so, you know, I would always suggest that's having somebody who's a chief data ethics officer. That's not a chief data officer who's responsible for accelerating the value from data. It's not a data security officer who's more concerned around the technical protection. It's somebody within the office whose goal is to ensure that the data is being used in the ethically correct way. And then that person will work with a variety of stakeholders within the company, the product team, the data science team, the marketing team, and the go-to-market team, to understand what their respective needs are and how they wish to use data, but also get them together to understand, and we call this the platinum rule, in terms of how does the customer expect their data to be used. So it's working with those it's at an initial point, at least, it's working with those stakeholders to understand philosophically, what does the customer expect from us as a company. That may differ between industry, that may differ between the demographic that you're working with, age being a key factor there, and it may differ geographically as well. But you need to ensure that for your customer, you are using the data in the way that they want it to be, that they want and expect it to be used. And there's not one person who can decide that at a company, because there's not one person who is the voice of the customer. So it's having that cross-functional input into what does the customer want, and how do they want their data to be used, and how should we position ourselves as a customer, as a company, to ensure that we deliver that to our customers.
No, thank you for that. You know, as marketers, you know, I think we think we lead the voice of the customer sometimes, you know, but you're right, like it is spread across the entire organization. And if we drill down, I'm just going to stick with you one more second, John, like if we drill down and we think about implementing these data ethics as part of our marketing efforts specifically, what are the right first steps to get that done when we think about this slice of
So, you know, the first step is as I say, is assessing how your customers want their data to be treated. And so that comes from an assessment of the customer. You look at your existing policy, you look at where you sit in the industry, and you come to a view on that. You also need to obviously work within the legal framework, but think, how are you honoring those consents that customers are providing you? You're looking at your data supply chain. is the data that you're using, is the manner in which you're processing the data done in the manner that the customer would expect, and are you being transparent around that? So that's your starting point of where we are, and then you can start to think where you want to be. You bring I would say the next step would be bringing the stakeholders who I've already mentioned together, and creating that framework, that set of guiding principles, and having executive buy-in to that of how we want to treat our customers' data. Then you take those principles within your organization, and you disseminate them amongst each team to let them know that this is a guiding foundation of what we're doing. You share them publicly, because this is something that you want the industry, you want your customers to hold you to account on, and you ensure that you've embedded those processes within your company to ensure that that data ethics underpins the product life cycle. It underpins the customer journey. It underpins the customer experience, so that you're not just paying lip service to this, but you're saying what you're going to do around data, and you're doing it.
Thank you for that. And panelists, please jump in at any point. You want to add to that?
So Karen, I might piggyback off of that. Couple of times in my career, we've started data governance teams just for the reason that John was saying. And the one thing that I've seen happen, and I was thinking while John was speaking, is it could feel like a burden, right? Like we've got all of these other things to do, and now poor John, right? John comes along and says, hey, now we've got to do this one other thing. But truthfully, these data governance teams have been one of the most impactful things I've ever been a part of. And here's why. So we do all of the things that John is saying, but go back to what Aaron was saying at the beginning. Data is our digital journey, right? Like they are not these two distinct things, they are one and the same. So while we have this cross-functional data governance team, data ethics team, we also are leveraging that same team to talk about our tech stack. What issues do we have? What gaps do we have? Where is the data not flowing the way it needs to? And what happens really quickly is you get this prioritized list of high impact, let's call it data projects, that get the attention they deserve, get buy-in because you've got the stakeholders around the table, and they get actioned. And I would say data tech stack stuff tends to be a hard conversation, right? Like marketers, we're in the weeds, right? We love our data, we love our tech, and then we go to talk to folks that aren't marketers. And it's just like you can see the eyelids drooping a little bit because it's such an in the weeds conversation, but the impact is so massive. So we find ourselves like trying to like be cheerleaders for these conversations that sound really dry. But when you come to it through like these data governance teams, and you get people just enough in the weeds with you that they understand, oh, this isn't marketing kind of geeking out on like the latest technology that we want to plug into our stack. This is how data flows. This is how we go to market. This is our customer journey. Again, all of these projects that may have never seen the light of day or would have taken a long time, I think, to rally that critical mass of energy around, go boop, 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 up the priority chain, because people get it. This isn't a marketing thing. This is a go-to-market thing. This is a digital customer journey thing. This is how we can do more with less or more with the same or deliver more value, or it could be a point of differentiation. So it just is such, I think, an important concept that people don't see this as a burden. It could not be the opposite. It is such an untapped opportunity for so many companies.
Oh, thank you for that, Kelly.
And what I would add there as well is that often this becomes an issue of scale. So you might think, well, now we're at this level as a company, and so we'll start to bring in this mindset. But inevitably, that's a harder thing to do because you already have processes, and there may be conflict with the new ideas that you're trying to bring in. And so the key piece of advice I would give is that you start this early, because it's a philosophical matter. It isn't a compliance matter. It isn't a security matter. There aren't rigid functional requirements here. This is about a mindset. And if you carry that mindset through the customer journey, through go to market, you'll be successful and you'll deliver value to your customers.
I want to just exclamation point what you just said, because the several times that I've done this, so much of those projects that need to get elevated are undoing past sins because there wasn't a team in place. So if you think you're too small or we're not there, we don't have a need for this yet, just start it. Maybe your agenda isn't as long as, larger, more established companies, but you're creating this foundational framework that will allow you to scale. Take it from those of us who've done it the reverse, right? Where you're looking in the rear view mirror and you're trying to undo stuff. It's difficult. And the more complex all of our tech stack become, the even harder it is, because now you've got the data flowing through so much more plumbing. So yeah, that's an excellent point.
Erin, I saw you unmute a couple times.
Yeah, I was just going to piggyback and kind of drill down a little bit of, we're talking about, this is a way to approach it, but a lot of marketers that I come in contact with, they're like, this sounds great, but how do I start? And I want to pull on a thread that Kelly mentioned, was find those high value projects, right, that speak to impact. And there's a maturity curve, right? So you may have these grandiose data strategy dreams, right? But start with a use case. And speaking now from a product management point of view, start with a use case that is going to drive that 60% ROI that I was talking about in those personalized consumer experiences. That will speak to the people that start to glaze over when you start to talk about data ethics and data policy, right? And that one use case that gets that data to start being stitched together in the way that Kelly was mentioning, that then fuels the further investment and the buy-in, and then it becomes just a cross-functional discipline and less so about one person owning the data moving forward. So pick that first use case and get started, and always lead with the impact that it's going to have on the organization.
Good advice.
Awesome. So you talked about a lot of different benefits. Are there any other benefits of being a great data steward? Avery, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about, how challenging it is and that people haven't been doing it and you have to start somewhere and it has to be diligent. But in my reading recently, I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasm that, hey, this can be great. This can be great for marketing. This can be great for analytics, because the reliance will shift more towards first-party data, zero-party data. And people are going to have to be better stewards with CCPA, GDPR, all the regulations. But that's going to be great. That's going to mean you're actually going to get good quality information about your customers. I use a scenario with my boss the other day that I frequently shop at a children's store online, and I purchase things and have them delivered to my granddaughter. But then I start seeing ads for diapers and formula and pacifiers, all these cheap things. Whereas I think if they knew that I was 60 years old, they would figure out I'm the grandmother and show me expensive things. I'm not buying diapers. I'm buying the frilly little dresses and the cowboy boots for the 1-year-old who can barely walk. So I think it's going to really have a positive effect on our ability to be relevant in our marketing. I think as long as we are good stewards, the end consumer will have more trust and therefore more loyalty. Data will be seen as an asset, not just for a quick turnaround pop-up ad, but for doing a real customer journey like Erin was talking about, of having the data clean and accurate and where it needs to be when your customer shows up. The customer goes to your website, they go to your Facebook page. You need to be ready to meet them with really relevant content, not just based on the fact that I was shopping on a children's website, but on the fact that I am 60 years old, that I live in Arkansas where it's hot and humid. You know, I worked with a very large retailer, nationwide retailer for many years, and marketing is different depending on where you live, your life stage, so many things that relying on third-party data or third-party cookies just doesn't get you. So I think it will end up being a benefit, not just to compliance and regulatory components, but to the ability to do good analytics and good marketing.
I think you bring up such a great point. I mean, there's two things there that are just sticking out to me. You know, one is obviously trust, and I think trust is a two-way street. It's a virtuous circle, right? So once the data gets better and better, then you as marketers can begin to start to rely on that. Because once you can't trust it, you're not thinking about all the meaningful ways that it could actually improve your business. And the other part that just makes sense to me when you said it is like all of these data privacy rules and regulations that are coming out there. You know, you see them, you're like, oh, another one. They seemingly come out almost every single year, and there has to be some sort of remediation around it. But if you think of it in a positive light, as it's going to make you better, you know, like you said, CCPA, GDPR, and now I think we have what Schrems too, that's talking about, you know, the data transfers and the data transfers and things like that. Like they feel like a heavy lift, but it's really trying to make you smarter and care more about what you're doing with the customer's data and make you a better marketer and better organizational, right? So I just love that twist in thinking.
Yeah, I trained this large retailer. The marketers had always just created a spreadsheet and handed it off to the IT guys to create audiences for them to market to. But then I trained them on actually using an application where they could run counts themselves, select audiences and fine tune them. And it was a transition, but then we were going to switch them to another tool. And one of the ladies told me, over my cold, dead body, you know, she's like, I love seeing the data. I love knowing this. And I think we've lost a lot of that with the transition of all the technologies. I think we've lost a lot of that really understanding of the customer.
Yeah, you're right. You're so right. So, you know, I get it, right? This is all good for business and good for the customer. But does the customer know that, right? So how do, and Erin, I'm going to direct this one to you, how do companies deliver on the customer expectation of personalization when we no longer will have all this personal data, because we need to get, many companies need to gather it, right? They haven't been focused on that before.
Yeah, so I think John kind of touched upon this, you know, in his kind of data ethics realm, but culturally where we're shifting, right, is to protect your own personal data and privacy. So therefore, in order for companies to be able to begin to capture that first party data or enrich that first party data that they already have, is to create that social contract with the consumer. Really, you have to provide a value exchange, you know, in its simplest form. You know, a value exchange is getting your SMS phone number for a coupon, right? That starts, once you have that phone number, right, you may in your CDP be able to connect that data to what Avery was saying was, you know, is that a grandmother? Is that, you know, who is that, right? So driving that value exchange to capture the data to then enrich it across the data platform that you have. And then another thing I wanted to talk about also is if you run a multinational business or a global business, right, the data privacy and ethics are different across geographies, and you have to be hyper conscious of that. Say, you know, in North America, just between Canada and the US, right? Canadians tend to treat their data much more private. And once you capture that, you have to honor that social contract. In the US, we're a little bit more lenient. You know, you go to the EU and they tend to be a little bit more guarded, right? And so understanding your customers in different geos is also wholeheartedly important.
Yeah, and that's a tough one to be able to understand and manage those. Kelly, just pulling on that thread, but also like how does the entire go-to-market team stay aligned with the use of data over time and also based on these different policies.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that Erin said earlier that was so helpful was find a use case. And I would say this is certainly true for either, newer or smaller companies, but honestly, I've seen it play out with companies of all different sizes. And where I'm going with this is if you form that data governance team or whatever you would call that cross-functional team, and you have a use case and you play that out and you demonstrate value, what's really nice about that is it gives you a foot in the door for resources, right? So it's hard to just out of left field say things like, we needed entire data ethics team, right? That's a hard case to make, but you can form a team with your existing employees, right? You get that cross-functional group of stakeholders around the table and you start elevating and actioning on these really high value use cases. And it leads to resource conversations, which I think is such an important point. So if you don't have the resource yet, make the team, just start the conversation and watch what happens. And I think this is kind of one specific example of something that leads more closely to your question, Karen, right? So go to market is multiple different teams, right? It's marketing, it's sales, it's product, it's CS. And we're seeing the emergence of these cross-functional roles. So like RevOps replacing sales ops and marketing ops, or even like titles like growth, right? Growth is kind of like one of these titles and buzzwords that acknowledges if we're doing this properly, it isn't about the individual departments, it's about the end goal and what we're looking to achieve. And again, I think teams like this where you're not ready for an FTE, you're not ready to make the investment, if you can form the team that just starts to elevate, this is go to market, this isn't marketing, this isn't product, this isn't sales, this is go to market, and ultimately this is how we make money, it just totally changes the conversation. And so, we're almost using data as like a wedge topic to get our foot in the door, and it forces us to align on that digital journey and ultimately your go to market. Because again, these things are all one and the same. Data is digital, digital is GTM. And so it just forces this alignment where I don't know if there's a lot of other either topics. Yeah, I guess I'll say that topics that really do this in the same way that like thinking about data strategy, customer journey really does, because it impacts everybody. So there's all of these ancillary and downstream benefits, which is, again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier. This is not a dry topic in any way, shape, or form. This is such an exciting opportunity for companies, again, of any size. I think there's benefits to what we're talking about here for any size company. Yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah. I want to add something there. I mean, I've been in data-based marketing for going on 30 years now, and you don't just need a team focused on this. Everyone needs to understand this. My team is developing a reporting solution and data platform right now, and I forward everything about CCPA and GDPR. I forward those to the whole team, to the UI people, not just the data people, to the user access people, and say, you need to understand the ramifications of these and how to build our solution to support these things. So I think that's what companies are going to have to do as well. Being from Axiom, I am entrenched in all of that sort of thing, but I don't think a lot of our end customers are. They haven't had to worry about it. They've relied on us to worry about it. And I think that needs to change as well. Everybody needs to be conscious of being a good data steward.
I like that, Avery. And as you talk about that, and you're sharing that you share all this information for the non-go-to-market teams, how do they fold into into this data strategy? How do they plug in? Can you just give an example of how that might work?
Yeah, so I lead a team of product managers, and I rely on them to be the translator between marketing and development. They need to understand marketing needs, but they also need to explain to marketing the marketing teams what can and can't be done. I've been in lots of meetings where myself or someone else would say, whoa, I don't think you can do that. We need to talk to John Story or someone in legal to see if we can do that. That's a great idea, sounds great, but we have obligations to be good data stewards, so we need to see if we can do that. And you have to take into account where your support people are, where your development people are. So it impacts us a lot too, to be good data stewards of our customers' data.
Thanks, Avery. John, this is for you. Okay, so a bunch of people need to be involved in this process, right? In order to do it right across the enterprise. How do ethics and legal teams continue to keep pace with the needs and the demands of the go-to-market teams as the use of the data involves? And specifically talking about like accountability and engagement and just moving things forward.
Yeah, so I think that question probably is based on the assumption that there's a natural tension between go-to-market and ethics and legal. And I think what we've tried to demonstrate on this call is that really that tension doesn't have to exist. It's about working together towards a philosophical goal that delivers value to the customer. So I think that if you start with that conceptual basis, there's an absence of that tension there. But I can understand that in other organizations it may be difficult because there's an immediate need for a short-term gain, or an understanding that this is what we want to do because we've always done it, and now we're being told that we can't. And so that may create a tension. But what I would say is that, and to your point of staying abreast of these things, in my experience, where data ethics stands, the law follows soon after. GDPR has not been a surprise to anybody since around 2004. Schrems 2 that you mentioned has not been a surprise for the last 5 years. So these are things that are inevitably going to happen. And once they're legislated upon, then the liability associated with non-conformance and the reputational harm associated with non-conformance is far greater. So I think that there's a value of getting ahead of these problems as well on an individual basis, as on an individual company basis, because once legislative changes happen, you have to make changes very, very quickly, and people become very concerned about that, and you're having to spend a lot of money and resource to re-engineer things. If we think about things on a industry basis, it's in everybody's interest to follow good ethical practices, because the reason that we have legislation is because people have acted in a way that the legislators didn't want them to act. So there was an unenvisaged pattern that occurred. People acted in a way that was, for example, unethical, and legislators legislated to stop people doing that in the future. The problem with legislation is that it's not necessarily the cleanest game. You have to make broad strokes, like GDPR. Often that legislation is technology neutral, and so always agnostic to specific types of technology. And so it has the legislation itself has unintended and chilling effects across many industries that were not foreseen. So I think from both an individual company basis and on an industry basis, it's in everybody's interest to act in an ethical manner, because it means that we're not having to scramble constantly to hit the requirements of differing legislations in differing territories. You know, as you mentioned earlier, Karen, you have CCPA, you have GDPR, you have Schrems 2, all of these different legislations or rulings that come in, and we feel that we have to scramble to deal with them. Whereas if you have a strong ethical foundation with what you're doing around data, you're always going to be moving towards to a place that's beyond compliance. So I think that's in everybody's interest.
I want to work with you, okay, because you have the right mindset. I think you're right. Like there is this inherent like conflict sometimes between legal and marketing, and I think it's really just about not understanding and not having that common point of view. And if we just shift our mindset around that, I think there would just be more collaboration in between those two areas. So thank you for that, because I think that's something that organizations need to kind of just address in general, like how we work together in a meaningful way. What are we both have the same goals, right? Now, but you also mentioned, and I'm going to turn this one to Erin, because you also mentioned the technology hasn't really kept up, right, with some of these new rules and regulations. So Erin, how do MarTech companies, we use all these different disparate tools, right? That's giving us loads of data that we need to now treat in a certain way. How can these MarTech companies evolve their product roadmaps to enable companies through these transitions, again, that seem to happen, almost every year?
Yeah. I'll take this kind of question in a two-part fashion. One around, just the data ethics and the privacy of it all. And then, what are we responding to in this changing world of a cookieless world, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of data privacy and ethics, right, you should definitely be seeking platforms and partners, right, that have kept up with these regulatory trends. I think GDPR was that transitional moment for a lot of MarTech companies that, the ones that just attacked GDPR in that narrow focus really aren't the ones that are succeeding now. If we foresaw GDPR as the future of data privacy and enable within our technologies data governance and data privacy features and functionalities that allow marketers to use them very easily and efficiently. A lot of these topics that we're talking about are fairly technical in nature, right? The right to erasure, where on all the servers that it exists, all the proof that you have to give. But marketers, that's not where we grew up and what we have interest in. So the companies that are providing the features and the tools to manage that easily are the ones that are succeeding. And as I mentioned, GDPR was one of those moments, and I kind of saw it firsthand with some customers where they were mortified that half of their database was going to have to be, taken out overnight. Mm-hmm. And with that, nothing happened overnight, right? Nothing happened with that 50% that wasn't engaging anyway, that you didn't collect the data, you weren't giving that value exchange to, right? It didn't actually matter all that much. And so that was our proof point to say, we should not be afraid of this privacy by design world. And really, when you give that value exchange to customers is really where you're going to see the enhanced ROI. So not being afraid of it and embracing it is a key there. And so then, as we move to a cookieless world, we've talked a lot about, first party data being wholeheartedly important. So MarTech companies that are altering their roadmaps to give marketers the ability to do these sophisticated techniques simply and altering their roadmaps to prioritize those things for marketers are the ones that will win. For example, right? Form capture has been around since the beginning of first party marketing, right? But the way in which that integrates into your website and an ease of use, and we're seeing the trend that marketers want zero code platforms, but the sophistication that would in prior lives require technical expertise. So providing those features to capture that data very easily and put it within the data platform to orchestrate it elegantly is really where we see the trend of MarTech companies kind of changing their roadmaps.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, so that just begs like a lot of different questions there, right? So we know that obviously this is the right thing to do, and there's all these wonderful benefits around it, right? And now we need to be evaluating our MarTech providers around how they help and help us implement and be good stewards. But now we also need to think about our marketing strategies, right? In order to advance this. So Avery, that question I'm going to just pose to you. How do we need to evolve our marketing strategy so we stay competitive, right? How does this need to change?
Well, I'm going to use a phrase that Erin gave me, what's old is new again. I have several friends, I'll use an analogy. I have several friends and family on Facebook that turned their personalization settings to off. And now they're complaining that they get all these random ads. And I'm like, well, what did you expect? You're not going to get fewer ads. You're just going to get random ads now instead of personalized ads. And I think that is what is going to happen for a while with online advertising. You're not going to see as many personalized ads after the demise of the third-party cookie. You're still going to see the same number of ads. They're just not going to be relevant to you. They're going to be random. So I think the shoppers are going to, or the consumers are going to still expect a personalized experience. They want their cake and to eat it too. So they're going to want a personalized experience, but they're going to want to feel comfortable about how their data is being used and that it's being stored safely. Marketers are going to have to change their strategies to use other techniques online, the form capture. They're going to have to ask questions, make your shopping experience interactive. Also may do more email than digital, may even resort to direct mail. SMS has always been very popular and one of the most effective channels. So I think we'll see much more of that. It's going to be survival of the fittest, with the more nimble marketing solutions having better chances. You're going to have to be adaptable to survive this. And there's opportunities for companies, marketing companies, MarTech companies, both, to rise through this and actually come out much better in the long run for not being so dependent on the third-party cookie.
Erin, can I add to that? So when I think about the funnel, it's all an algorithm, right? It's the number that you put in, and that's your percent conversion. And those are your variables that you ultimately can toggle. And I think, Erin, you hinted at this, and Avery, you did as well. It's easier often to increase your conversion than to put more in the top of the funnel. This is the whole foundation of ABM, of inbound. And so one of the things that I just wanted to underscore is it's your channels that you use, but also the analytics that you put around them. So like when someone comes to your website, are they struggling to convert? Form fill, Erin, right? Form fill, these things that are so foundational. If there's any friction there, here you paid all this money, you spent all of this time. And once they get to your website, those cookies really don't matter anymore. Now it's on you to create this frictionless journey. And I think that's both the gap for many, but also the opportunity, Avery, to underscore your point, where if you really have elegant analytics and you really are on top of that customer journey when you are in total control of it, and you really increase that conversion, to me, that's the path, that's the opportunity. And I feel like we focus so much on the channels that a lot of the analytics that we can do to optimize, refine, and really either hyper target people or give them a more elegant journey along the way. To me, that's the line to gain. So I think it's more just reimagining the variables of highest importance within your funnel.
What I'm hearing there is the buzzword in my head is just about quality, right? So quality of customer, quality of the experience that you're giving them, and that leads to the quality of data that you curate from them. And again, it's that virtuous cycle, right? That's just keeps delivering for you and becomes even more trusted within your organization, but also out towards your customer as well, because what you're delivering is of higher quality. Now, marketers, as we know, leverage a lot of automation, right? A lot of tools to get this stuff done, right? So can we get a little bit specific? Erin, I'm gonna ask you this question. Because we're talking about the MarTech stack, right? Like we need to focus on providers that are enabling us to be better stewards of the data. So how do we evaluate that? What are the fundamental elements of the MarTech stack for companies to have a robust digital customer journey?
Yeah, so I kind of think about it in, as you were mentioning, Karen, what are the foundational pieces and then what are the kind of the point solutions around it? So I'll just focus here on the fundamentals of the, the foundation, if you will.
Yeah.
We tend to think about it in a Venn diagram sense because you can't have one without the other. If you think about the customer data platform, right? Everything we've talked about up until now is all about the customer data, right?
Right.
And then, you need a platform that is circled around that journey orchestration across channel. And that sounds, fairly simplistic and easy to do, but as you get into it, the nuances across channels and being able to orchestrate fluidly across consent of those channels, that journey orchestration platform. And Kelly hit it right on the nose, right? As marketers, we tend to think about capturing the data, orchestrating the customer experiences. But what always, is in the back of your mind was, well, how did that perform? But you're racing and you're all about kind of production, but taking a step back and really having a platform that has journey analytics is going to be your linchpin moving forward. So that trifecta of data platform, journey orchestration, and journey analytics is really those foundational pieces that you need to focus on to have that fluid data, fluid cross-channel conversation powered by that underlying data. Then you have, your point solutions around, specific channels, enhancing data, et cetera. But if you focus on those three foundational pieces, right, the rest will plug in.
So as I'm looking at my new vendors, right? So that's my internal practice around having the journey analytics and trying to understand. But as I go out and I look at my existing vendors or I'm evaluating new ones, are there some key questions I should be asking, right? To really especially as a person new to this, right? And we're just kind of formulating that. Of course, we should be having these conversations internally, but we know that, some of the people that are going to be going out and sourcing solutions may not be super well versed in this just yet. Are there a couple of key questions or flags that marketers should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so I'll let other folks jump in as well. But for me, right, if you're looking for the customer data platform, you've got to focus on the data stewardship, right? So ask the leading questions around, what's their perspective on data privacy, and if they kind of go, that's table stakes, you're in a good position, right? Then you start to focus on functionality, and then, with the customer data platform, you need to find, how does that then go from a data curation to execution and orchestration, and where those intersection points are. And if there's like strong integrations or there's a platform solution that goes across both, that's where I would start with that. With journey orchestration, I think the sophistication of being able to orchestrate across channel is wholeheartedly important. So focusing there, and then, tearing down of what are the secondary kind of features and functionalities of the journey orchestration. And journey analytics is such an ambiguous space at the moment. So getting a clear definition of what journey analytics means to that company and how that drives that full circle view of marketing to really drive better campaigns and better marketing in real time. So understanding their vision of where journey analytics is going, especially in the absence of the third-party cookie, is key. So maybe I'll turn it to Avery here for a second to talk about what are the questions you should be asking your vendors.
Yeah, I would start with, similar to Aaron, asking them about their data curation. How do they manage your data? How do they link your data together? Um, what processes are there to maintain the currency of the data? What aggregations are done? How can I delete data? How can I update data? What kind of reports am I going to get just about my data? Not always about the performance of the campaign, but I need a report just on my data, the health of my data. How many customer IDs do I have? How many accounts do those represent? How many households does that represent? Do you append demographic data? Do you append sociographic data? You know, talk to to your vendor about what you can get to go with your data. Not everybody for a while was all focused on the data lake. Oh, we're just going to put everything in the data lake. Well, then nobody can use it because it's not curated. It's not structured. Your campaign management tools can't read that. Your analytics tools can't read that. So you end up having to do have these data marts spin off of that. And then, you know, people are updating that with opt-out and not updating the parent database. So you have to talk to them about that whole big picture.
And just to add to that as well, and it's probably going to be dealt with by your security team as well, but there's some really important compliance questions that will be asked in there as well. For example, the location of the data processing, because that implicates things like cross-border transfer, Schrems 2, all those types of things. Security, clearly, like, are they adhering to the security standards that you promised to your customer? So it's an issue of looking at your privacy policy and checking that that's passed through to the end customer, that's passed through to the vendor, sorry. So you're looking at security, who's accessing, purpose of use. Can they only use it to deliver the services to you, or are they able to aggregate it and use it for other analytic and diagnostic purposes? So it's all those things, ensuring that the contract you have with your customer is being honored down the supply chain. And that speaks to the, you know, the aspect of data ethics, that supply chain governance, being transparent about your supply chain, because you're having to disclose those third party, what we call sub processors. You're having to disclose those to your customers through your privacy policy as well. And Avery makes a really good point around deletion. And there's two aspects to that. There's one, are we ensuring that when we get a deletion request or an erasure request, that we're passing that to our sub processors? That's an internal issue. But then two, for your sub processors, what does deletion actually mean? When does it occur? Does deletion just mean you can't access it? Does it mean it's actually deleted from their servers in 30 days? Or is there something different? So it's all about ensuring that you have a clear supply, you have a transparent supply chain. And by asking those questions, Erin talked about table stakes, but by asking those questions early on in the process, it becomes very clear who is going to be a responsible steward of your customers' data and who isn't. So this is something that you should build into your procurement processes, because it's entirely necessary to engender that consumer trust, because not only does your consumer have to trust you, but they have to trust your providers as well.
I have a thought on that too, Karen, if I can.
Yes,
And like, to me, the word that's flashing in my brain listening to this, it's scale. So like, all of us do this, right? When you're evaluating MarTech, we're MarTech, right? So we're just as guilty. You come at it with the features, the tech specs, the benefits, all of that like exciting sizzle stuff. But to me, it's all an engine, right? Like, marketing is an engine. And regardless of all of those really fancy things you can do, if when I bolt you on, you break my engine, now we're in trouble, right? And so many tech stacks become this Frankenstein of all of these systems. And there's so many implications. And obviously we'll keep it narrow enough just to data for the purposes of this call. But to do something really elegant once does me no favors. I need to know that we can do it 1,000 times over, repeatedly, do more of it, apply it to different verticals, customer segments, and that you're not going to break the engine? And so to me, that's a good kind of question that puts the stick in the spoke a little bit. Like, there's so many companies out there that do really exciting things. I almost don't care, right? If we're talking to you, I know the cool things that you do and we need it. I need to know, how can we operationalize this? How can we scale it? And again, to me, that dovetails perfectly with the data question, but it's a good one. I think that's just a good disruptive question to put people back on their heels and think, this isn't, maybe for you, it's a one-time sale, but I'm the steward of this engine, right? Like, I need to know that this is something that we can scale over time.
Yeah, to pull on that a little bit, I think as you know, we've graduated in marketing over the past several years. Real time has actually, started as, okay, real time is really that ETL batch in a micro batch process, right? But real time today is real time, and what Kelly was mentioning, and from an architectural perspective, because we're tech geeks over here, is very hard to achieve, and so being able to deliver on that real-time interaction management with that one-to-one personalized communication over and over at scale is where you should definitely be focused. I love you pulling on that thread, Kelly, because again, you mentioned, there's flashy, sexy features, right? But at the end of the day, what's actually going to make or break your business is this engine, and is it built for that scale that you're going to put through it?
Yep.
And going back to the data governance team, this is where you would bring that new exciting thing that you want to bolt onto your engine. You bring it to data governance, and it's like that red team concept, right? Poke holes in it. How is this thing going to break the engine? What do we need to do to get ready? This is where all of this starts to feed into each other, because we're all guilty, right? Like, we all, oh my gosh, you can do that now. I want to do that now. Let's, bolt this thing on. And maybe it would be okay from a marketing perspective, but maybe it doesn't jive with John with data, or sales with how they manage, their portion of the customer journey. That is where that data governance team is so much more impactful than just data ethics, right? It's this engine that you've created to really move quickly, but in a way that's responsible.
Well, as you all were talking, I mean, you really just kind of illustrated why this is a cross-functional effort, right? It's a big rock, but it's incredibly important. I also want to encourage people to ask your questions in the chat. We'll be wrapping in a few minutes in terms of the discussion, but want to get to your questions as well. So, Erin, I'm going to come back to you. So if today is today's current state, how would you describe the future state and that transition into this new world order of data ethics?
So I always think about it as kind of a maturity curve, right? And I always go good, better, best. And you mentioned it, Karen. It's daunting. These are big, big rocks. So if you can clear the noise, right, and think about this as a maturity curve and find where you are. You may be a mature organization that is actually delivering on this really well. So how are you going to push your MarTech vendors to that next level, like beyond, right? But where a lot of us sit are kind of in that, we have our first party data, right? But we're not enriching it. And we're kind of in the middle of that maturity curve. So bringing it back to kind of the beginning of, find that high value use case that is going to drive that impact across your organization, get the buy-in that way, execute on that well, and then you're one step up that maturity curve, and then you tackle the next project, right? And you're farther up the maturity curve, and at the end of the day, you've made that transition gracefully, building impact across the organization. But if you've done kind of our suggestions well, you now just have a cultural aspect around data governance that spans across sales, marketing, product, et cetera. And it becomes business as usual and not digital transformation anymore. And you just continue up that maturity curve.
I like that. Move from digital transformation to BAU. I like that. So just this has been so enlightening. There's just so much to do and probably a ton more questions around this, but I want to thank all of you for providing your insight. Before we formally wrap, I want to ask each of you just, what is one piece of advice you'd want to give to listeners today? Out of all the wonderful things you said, what could you drill down into one takeaway? And I think that's actually a hard question.
I'll start and say that I tell people embrace technology, but don't marry it. Don't rely on technology to fill your gaps in your processes and your teams. Don't expect a solution to solve all of this for you. You, as the owner of the data, have to take responsibility for making sure that it's safe. And to Kelly's point, where you're scrutinizing something you're appending to your solution, you need to also be prepared to extract pieces from your solution. So you want to be sure that you're developing things in kind of a compartmentalized way, so that if you pull a piece out, the rest of it doesn't unravel.
Like that.
I guess I can go next. I loved that, Avery. I kind of wish that was mine, but I'm going to come up with something different just to try to one up you. Just pull the team together, right? Like, I think folks are like, gosh, I don't know what we're going to talk about during that first meeting, or, what's the right cadence? Are folks going to be engaged, right? Like, just find a group of cross-functional stakeholders, get them in the room, start bringing things up like data, like your tech stack, like the customer journey. And honestly, most of this solutions itself, because people have thoughts, right? Like, maybe no one's ever brought the forum together to have those thoughts being shared, but I've never been in a scenario where myself and my peer group with the rest of the go-to-market team, we sit down at a table and we start talking about customer journey and what can we do better in data and all of these things, and everybody sits there quiet, right? So just do something. And a lot of this stuff will flesh itself out. Things will rise to the top, or you're going to uncover issues that you didn't even know you had. And that's your priority list. But don't be afraid to take that first step, because I think you would find more often than not, everybody's kind of thinking the same thing, maybe with like a slightly different perspective, but there's value there that's, basically left untapped until you just pull that group together.
Great advice. Thank you.
And a thread we pulled on kind of in the beginning was that there's this inherent tension between data ethics and marketing, right? And hopefully through the conversation you've heard, it's not scary, right? And when you do it right, there's actually that value exchange with your customers that actually enhances ROI. So being that kind of advocate internally to tell that story over and over, to break down that internal tension, I think will not only, personally develop you as a thought leader around it within the organization. So there's personal benefit, right? And then the company benefits by actually driving that ROI.
Great piece of advice. John, you're going to close us out.
So just as this is ongoing, like Kelly's talked about, start early, and I think that's really important. But I think as you're moving along, there's changing privacy laws. There's the ethics moves along, and the conversation changes. But I would say if there's one thing you can take in terms of analyzing a situation, as a privacy professional, we always talk about the smell test. And so look at a situation where you're using data and think, if that was my data or my child's data, would I want it to be used in this way? And that's a really good way to find your ethical compass around this.
That's a really good one. So thank you. We're going to turn to questions. We have a couple in the chat right now. So this one is from Eric. How do we redevelop trust when there are accidental breaches of consumer data? And also when breaches occur, do you really have to keep it in-house and solve the problem? Or is it important to inform consumers about the breaches and the extent of the breaches? Anyone want to take that one?
John, I feel like you should answer from a legal perspective, and then maybe I can follow on with a communication perspective.
You're on mute, John.
Yeah, thanks. So if there is a breach of personal data from a legal perspective under GDPR, within 72 hours of uncovering it, and that's not suspecting it, it's having done your analysis and knowing it's there, then you have to inform those people who are affected by it. So if you're not informing them, you're breaching GDPR. And that's the extent. You have customers based in Europe, but there are similar laws within the United States as well. So you absolutely should be doing that, and you don't want to fall foul of that. Should you keep it in-house? My view would be absolutely not, because from a branding perspective, it's far, far worse to be caught in a lie than to acknowledge a mistake. And so I think that, this goes, I can give you the legal answer, but just the most important answer is, it's far, far more harmful for you to be caught into a lie. My experience and having dealt with data breaches, it's all about, and how you redevelop trust. It's all about how you communicate that to the customer. And that's where the science and the art of privacy law, that's where the science and the art of privacy law exists around that. And to do that, you work in tandem with your communications team. So Kelly, do you want to take on that part?
Yeah, so I'll comment from like a general crisis communication, right? Maybe agnostic to this specific example. And I've worked in really sensitive industries in the past, and you're right, John, like it's all about any crisis communication book, expert, agency will tell you it is get ahead of it, be proactive, be very, very transparent, fess up to it. The more that you can communicate about what happened, what you're doing, was it deliberate? Hopefully not, right? Like the more that you can lean into the conversation, ultimately with the goal of controlling the narrative, is how you build that trust back. The more that you are guarded and closeted and not telling that full story, people will know, right? So, and oftentimes you've seen companies that do this so well, they come out the other side of the crisis with better brand equity than when they went in. It truly is an opportunity, hopefully not one that anybody, has to endure, but if done properly and with that super high level of proactive transparency, and I would say authenticity, that's 100% the direction that I would lean into.
And I think, I hope it's fair to say that, no one intends to have a data breach, right? But there are nefarious people out there that are always doing something and testing systems and trying things. So, a company could fall victim to that. So just being prepared for that. Do you think that, being good, practicing ethical data practices is just kind of in some way, and it's not going to provide foolproof protection, but is creating some sort of extra layer of protection, I guess I could say, around some of these other nefarious actions? Or do you think that they're separate and distinct from your experience? John, you're on mute. Sorry,
From a supply chain perspective, completely, because most of your data breaches happen in your supply chain, and then you have to inform your customer. So everything that Erin and Avery spoke about there previously, that's really important. The law recognizes that accidents happen and that you can be subject to nefarious actions. All you have to do is maintain the security standards that you said you were going to do maintain in your privacy policy. So it's not a problem in itself to have a breach. On top of the communications layer as well, it's really good to have an incident response plan and have some dry runs in place, because when that 72-hour clock starts ticking, I can tell you every time I've been involved in that situation, it's been on a Friday afternoon.
It always happens, John. That was the only other thing I was going to say, right? And again, you could apply this to any crisis situation, but have a plan, because you're not going to be thinking straight in the moment. You're not going to be asking all of the right questions. You're not going to be engaging all the people that you need to engage. You can even pre-script press responses, all of these things, so that it adds this level of comfort, predictability, and your guardrails when it is intense. And it is always Friday afternoon. I don't know how that happens.
And having been through a weekend like that myself. It's also very helpful to have your data dictionary. Every component of your solution, you need to know what data is in there, because that's what you have to reveal as well. And so when I'm working in a marketing database, I make sure the clients know there is no reason whatsoever for you to send us their actual account number, their social security number. Don't need any of that. Need maybe a masked account number, an encrypted account number. I discourage clients from putting birth date in the file. I'm like, birthday, birth month, that's fine. Age is fine, but there's no reason to actually have my full birth date in one field. Just breaking it out helps protect you. So there's a lot of things you can do to prepare for the event of a breach. That's just good policy anyway. It's very helpful to have a data dictionary on all your components. And in the event of a breach, here's what data was there. If it was on an FTP server, you should have the layouts that are going there and be able to say, here's what data was there. That can be very helpful and maybe save part of your weekend.
John, were you going to say something before?
No, Avery covered everything.
Oh, okay, got it. No, thank you for those answers. We have another question here. Do you recommend customer shopper engagement on data ethics, inviting them to the party, so to speak, on policies around ethics? So should we be inviting them to the conversation on what we're doing and how we're executing?
Yeah, and I answered that partly. I think that would be great if you can manage to do it in a one-on-one format, direct communication with, an individual. Do not try to do it through a social media format, because then you will just be flooded with naysayers and people looking for a fight. I think you can get probably really good engagement and loyalty by asking individuals through an email, hey, what do you think is appropriate? What's not appropriate? I think that would be some really good information.
Thanks, Avery. I had actually one tactical question. Kelly, you brought up, a couple times, like identify a use case, right, to get this going. Can we just get a little bit more deeper on, like, how do you find the right use case that's going to accurately identify what actually hopefully project what you want across the organization? What was an example of one particular one? For example, I think for me, visuals are really good. So what's one example in how we bring those key stakeholders into that one example?
Yeah, I would say kind of a two-part answer. One, I would not stress about finding it. Again, like, I've never gathered a group of my peers around the table and opened up this conversation and it was crickets, right? It's typically the opposite. We all kind of have this backlog of things where it's like, gosh, we know these next right steps, but it's not solely within our jurisdiction to take them. It is, a collaborative team. So gosh, now I'm so excited to have those stakeholders around the table. Let me tell you about this opportunity. Oh, you're telling me about that opportunity, and then you get this groundswell of really amazing ideas and then the prioritization. So I would not ever be concerned that there's going to be a dearth of ideas and use cases. I think a lot of them goes back to what Erin was mentioning earlier and where you are in the maturity curve, right? So the use case of a company that's just starting out is likely wildly different than one that's got a more elegant or mature tech stack customer journey. So again, I don't know if there's one that's right or wrong, but it could be something as simple as properly gathering and applying intent data to top of funnel lead generation, right? That's really simple, but you could project that all the way out and, creating custom environments within your website, or, really going deep into the weeds on like specific ABM type strategies. So I think there's a million examples out there, but like I say, that's why kind of my closing advice was what it was. You're going to find the projects, right? They're going to find you. It's going to be so obvious when you've got your stakeholders with you where the lines to gain are. Your bigger problem is going to be prioritizing, to be honest with you.
Got it. Erin, I saw you come off of mute for a second.
Oh yeah, I was just, in a B2C example where we're seeing, everyone wanting to really have these fluid cross-channel experiences, but a lot of folks are actually new to the SMS channel and the consent capture is different. So you lead with, this will get us a lot more, ROI, et cetera. And that's your use case. And you want to become multi-channel, right? Well, you've got to start first with the data capture strategy, right? And so that one is a common challenge and an arena that folks want to get into to really, start to market across web, email, SMS, mobile, and you really have to have that consent and data strategy in place. And so entering into a new channel is one of those aspirations that everyone has. And to then bring it down to the tactical, well, where it all starts is the data capture, and that opens the floodgates to the conversation.
Thank you. I think that's a great note to end on. I mean, there's so many good things in here, but just again, some buzzwords that kind of bubble to the top for me was first about trust, right? Developing that quality, developing a cultural mindset around this. Yes, it may seem daunting, but it's the right thing to do, and it's going to deliver value all the way down the chain if you put your focus on data ethics. So it's not something to be scared of, right? It's something to embrace and advance across the organization. And this could be a great thought leadership opportunity for all the marketing professionals listening here, because it really does provide a tremendous value for your customer, and then of course internally across the organization. So I want to thank all of you for sharing your insights and for being AMA New York's newest partner. You can learn more about Acoustic and how they help marketers aim higher and focus on the big picture at acoustic.com. And thanks again to everyone who joined us today, and also to those who attended our other sessions during our 3-part series on cookieless marketing. If you missed any of the 3 sessions, you can tune into AMA New York's newsletter or follow us on social for links to the YouTube recordings, including this one. And then you can have something else to binge watch at your leisure. So I wish everyone have a wonderful day. You have a couple of minutes to transition to your next meeting. Thank you, John, Avery, Kelly, and Erin. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Karen. It's been a pleasure.